Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by Neely, Spence, Gracey, and Cindy Kuzma. My name is Sue Outlaw, Marketing Manager here at Human Kinetics and the facilitator for today's presentation. The webinar is scheduled for an hour and is being recorded. By the end of the day tomorrow, maybe even today, you can expect an email containing the link to this recording. For this presentation, you'll be able to hear me and our presenters, but you will not be able to speak directly with us. If you're having problems with the audio, please call in by clicking on the Use Telephone option in the Audio tab and dialing in with the number and audio pin provided. If you have any questions for the presenters, please ask them through the Questions tab or the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We will probably have some time at the end of the presentation for a question and answer session, so use that question function for that as well. As a little thank you gift, one lucky person attending today's webinar will win a free copy of their new book, Breakthrough Women's Running. Everyone attending will be put into a random drawing, and the winner will be contacted by me via email tomorrow morning. Neely and Cindy have a great and information-packed presentation, so you're not here to listen to me. Let me turn it over to Neely and Gracey, or Neely and Cindy, sorry.
Thank you so much. We're so excited that you're all here, and we are really thrilled to get the opportunity to talk with you in more detail about our book. I just wanted to take a moment to introduce ourselves in case not everyone is familiar with us. My name is Neely Gracey. I'm a mother runner based in Boulder, Colorado. I ran professionally for 5 years before having my 2 boys, and now I am working back to that elite fitness level. I am the founder and head coach for Get Running Coaching, which is an online coaching business to help runners with their goals. And I am so excited that I had the opportunity to produce this book and be able to reach beyond just the runners that I currently work with to runners all over the world. I am also going to introduce my co-author, Cindy Kuzma. She's a Chicago-based runner who writes for Women's Running, Runner's World, Self, and other publications. She has co-authored several books, including this one, and has run the Boston Marathon not once, not twice, but 7 times. So Cindy is going to give you a little preview of what we are going to share with you today.
Thanks so much, Neely, and thanks to everyone for being here today. We're really excited to talk with you. And yes, I have run the Boston Marathon 7 times, each of them much slower than Neely has run the Boston Marathon, but collectively we have a lot of experience, and we talked to a lot of great experts for this book, and we're excited to share some of that with you today. So we're going to go over just a few of the sections and chapters that we have in the book, Breakthrough Women's Running, and this is just a preview of what we're going to talk about today. First of all, we're going to define what we mean by a breakthrough in the first place. Then we're going to talk some about goal setting in a chapter that we call Dream Big, Start Small. We're going to go over the chapter that we have in the book about menstrual cycles and hormone levels. This is something that's unique to Breakthrough Women's Running, and we're excited to share some of this with you. We're going to talk some about recovery and getting that balance of training and recovery correct. And finally, we're going to go over a chapter we call Breathe Better, which is some really interesting and exciting information that Neely and I are going to share with you today. So we're going to start by defining a breakthrough, and to do that, Neely is going to share some stories about breakthroughs that she has experienced as an athlete.
I'm so excited to share these stories with you because I think that the word breakthrough came to us very early in the writing process, and we knew that that was the word we wanted for our title. And I want to share my first story, which is one of the biggest breakthroughs that I've had in my career as a professional athlete. So when I stood on the starting line of the 2016 Boston Marathon, I knew I was meant to be there. It just felt so full circle for this marathon to be my debut at the distance, since it was the race my dad was running the day I was born. I had logged over 1,000 miles over those 4 months of preparation for that one big race. And now there I was running this dream race of mine. And as the miles started to click off, I found myself right at home at this new distance. When I hit mile 21, I remember thinking every step is a new PR because I've never run further than 21 miles in my training. And as I made that left-hand turn on Boylston and I sprinted to the finish line, pumping my arms to carry those tired legs, I knew what a huge breakthrough that performance was for my career as a professional athlete and as a coach. I had, everything came together on that day. The preparation all aligned, and I was able to meet all of my goals and be very successful. Fast forward nearly 4 years later, and there I was, towing the line of another marathon. But this one looked a lot different. I was far less prepared. I had only 2 months of training instead of the 4 that I had for Boston. And I was coming off a tougher phase of life. I had a challenging pregnancy with my first son, a difficult postpartum time, a stress fracture, and with all of those, I ended up taking nearly 10 months off of training. So I was basically starting from scratch with my fitness level. But during that pregnancy, I set a goal that I wanted to qualify for my third Olympic trials. And it's something that I wasn't able to let go of. I couldn't drop it because it still lit a spark in me and felt worth pursuing. So I signed up for the Houston Marathon in 2020. And as that race unfolded, I was right on pace, running exactly what I needed to make that goal happen. It certainly got hard. The lack of long runs caught up to me around in those final 10 miles. And I was able to hang tough, and I crossed that finish line with the qualifying time, meeting that goal that I had set for myself, despite everything that had I'd been up against and I had fought through. And it felt like a huge victory. It was another breakthrough for me, despite that race being significantly slower than my personal best time. So I think these two stories show how a breakthrough can happen at many different phases of your life. And Cindy is going to share a little bit more about what this could look like for you.
Yeah, Neely is absolutely right. And I think her story really exemplifies that. I know sometimes when you hear the word breakthrough, you think a personal best or the fastest time you could possibly run. And while that is one definition of a breakthrough, the definition that we were working with for our book was really any performance that kind of breaks you through to the next level. And that might look different at different phases of your life. So you might be in a phase of your life like Neely was for the Boston Marathon, where you can really put much of your time and many of your resources into achieving your race goals. Or you might be at a different phase of life, as she was in the second example, where you have more on your plate and you might not be able to give as much to your training, but you can still set yourself up for success and accomplish something you didn't quite believe was possible. So no matter where you are in your life, in your running career, if you're like me, a master's athlete who might not touch her fastest times again, you can still achieve a breakthrough, and this book is still for you, and it can help you get there. And another thing that Neely's example shows is that those breakthroughs that come at different points of your life, they're no less rewarding and satisfying. And in fact, sometimes they're even more rewarding and satisfying because of the other people who are there to share them with you, or because of the obstacles that you've overcome along the way. So when we start talking about how to get to those breakthroughs, it all starts with smart goal setting, and Neely is going to begin talking a little bit about what this has looked like for her.
Yeah. So our very first chapter is about goal setting, naturally, and it's called Dream Big, Start Small. A successful running journey begins with clear, compelling goals. That seems simple enough, but there's an art to setting goals that are right for you as an individual. They must be big enough to excite you, but not so out of reach that they set you up for disappointment. They also need to acknowledge where you are right now in your running life and in your life overall. And when I look back on my Boston Marathon debut performance, I truly believe that it was so successful due to my diligent goal setting. I had 3 big outcome goals. One is run 2:35. That was my goal time. 2, be top 10 overall. 3, be top American. And I ran 2:35.00. I was 9th. And I was the top American. And so I crushed all 3 of those. And I think that it's because I had very diligently thought through my process goals that I would apply daily, weekly, monthly during my preparation. And it wasn't that everything went perfectly and smoothly the whole entire 4-month buildup. No, I definitely had ups and downs. I got a bone bruise on the bottom of my foot that knocked me out for 2 weeks. I had a blister that was so bad, I had to see a wound specialist and run with a tube of Neosporin in my sports bra to apply every few miles to reduce friction. But I was able to get through those challenges because I was so dialed in with my rest, my hydration, my strength training, and my mantra to do less with more focus. And that kept me concentrated on those goals. So here's some more insight into setting process goals and how you can do this in your own training.
Great. So Neely talked about her outcome goals for the Boston Marathon, and she didn't talk about this specifically, but I just want to touch on it briefly because we talk about it in the book, and we think it's really important when you're setting a big, ambitious goal for yourself. So when you have these outcome goals, it's a great idea from the beginning, and then again later on as you get closer to your goal rate, to set different levels of goals, to set an A goal, a stretch goal, a goal that can happen for you if everything goes perfectly during your training and your race. But it's also a great idea to set B and C goals, which are goals, reasonably achievable goals, or even a fallback goal if lots of things don't go well for you on race day or during your training cycle. And the reason this is important is because A, as Neely talked about in her Boston buildup, not everything is going to go perfectly, probably. But if you take this into account from the beginning and set different levels of goals, you can still feel proud of yourself. You can still know that you set a goal and achieved it, even if a lot goes wrong on race day. So we talk more in detail about how to set these different levels of goals in the book, but they are a great way to set yourself up for success and for your next breakthrough. But what I want to spend a little bit more time talking about are these process goals. So those big outcome goals, those breakthrough goals, those are critically important for motivation and for guiding your process. But it's these process goals, the things you're going to do each and every day, that are going to give you a framework to build up to those bigger goals. And we talk a lot about this in Breakthrough. So each chapter of Breakthrough covers a different general topic. And then at the end of that chapter, we give you some examples of breakthrough goals, of process goals to set that relate to that topic. So what we recommend is maybe at the beginning of every month or at the beginning of every phase of your training cycle, you think about what are the potential barriers, what are the potential obstacles that might hold you back from achieving your outcome goals, and then set small daily steps, small daily process goals that can help you overcome those barriers to reach your goals. So maybe set about 3 to 12 of these small process goals at a time and review them regularly and see how they're working for you. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of these. So one example is, say one of your obstacles is fitting everything in to your busy schedule. And we know this is an obstacle that many women runners face. So say your schedule looks something like this. You get up in the morning, you get your kids off to school, then you have time for your run before you start your day, your work day, or whatever it is that you're doing that day. So if one of your potential obstacles to getting your run in is just having the time to do it, a process goal you could set is to wear your running clothes, to drop off for your kids. And that way you just remove some of that friction, remove that obstacle, and have that small daily step that's going to take you to that bigger goal of getting your training done and reaching your breakthrough. Strength training, we have a whole chapter about strength training, and it's very important for your performance as well as for injury prevention. But I know Neely knows when she's working with runners, it's hard for them to find time to fit strength training into their schedule. They want to run and they need to. That's the most important part of training for a big goal. But getting that strength training is also critically important. So if this is a struggle for you, as it is for many runners, we recommend this as a process goal. Go through your calendar for the next week and block just 2 to 3, 5 to 10 minute sessions for strength training. We actually have routines in the book that you can get done in 5 to 10 minutes. So we bet if you look at your schedule, you can find that. And if you block that into your schedule, just like you would any other appointment, a work meeting or something like that, that's really going to increase the chances of you getting that work in. So those are just some examples of process goals, or what we call breakthrough goals, that can help you get to those big outcome goals. So next, we're going to talk about a chapter that I think is really unique and fascinating, and something we were really excited to cover in Breakthrough Women's Running, and that is hormones and your menstrual cycle and how that impacts your training and performance. So Neely is going to share a little bit of her personal experience there to kick us off.
Well, I guess I have to admit first that it took me way longer than I feel it should have for me to realize how my cycle impacted my performance. I would randomly bonk workouts to the point that I wondered if I had an asthma attack or something. My heart rate would feel really high. I couldn't recover very well in between intervals. I would get really sore after, and my confidence would be shaken because I felt like my fitness was in a bad spot. And then magically the next week I would feel great and I would have like one of my best workouts. And I was like, how is it that I can go from having one of my worst workouts ever to having my best workout ever within like a week's time? And it wasn't until I started tracking my period that I realized it wasn't random after all, that there was totally a link between the week leading into my cycle and having poor performance, and the week following my cycle having great performance. And once I put that together, I realized that I'm just sensitive to the high hormone phase, which was also impactful during the early stages of my pregnancies for both kids. I had very quick, like I knew before I even took a pregnancy test that something was off because my hormones were elevated and it was impacting my ability to run. So now that I recognize when I feel terrible and when I feel good, I'm able to adjust my training and maybe do some effort-based workouts, reduce stress, reduce the volume, reduce the intensity that week of high hormones. Once I get my period, I feel great, and then I can put in some more solid training after that. So then I'm able to work with my body instead of fighting it. So Cindy has some more insight into the details of hormones and ideas for you to implement in your training.
Right, so I want to encourage Neely to give herself a little bit of grace on this. She isn't the only athlete or the only woman to not really recognize the impact of hormones on her health and performance. And in fact, until relatively recently, women weren't studied that much, even in medical research overall, let alone in exercise science research, because the researchers knew that monthly hormonal fluctuations would interfere with the experiments. They would think, oh gosh, we're not going to be able to control for those ebbs and flows of hormones. So we're just not going to study women at all and just assume that studies in men will equally apply to women. So fortunately, we've moved beyond that. And now we know that studying those ebbs and flows gives us so much information about what works for our bodies and our health and our training and performance. So it would be wonderful if I could say to you today that the research definitively shows that every athlete is like Neely, and that the week before their period, they feel terrible. The week of their period, they feel wonderful. And here are the 5 things that you can do to address that in your training. Unfortunately, what the research shows now is that isn't necessarily the case. The ebbs and flows of hormones during the month do have an impact on your training, on your performance, and most definitely on how you feel, but it isn't consistent from athlete to athlete, from woman to woman, from person to person. So while this means there isn't an easy answer to understanding your cycle and working with it instead of against it, it does give you an idea for how you can start to figure this out for yourself. And you can kind of follow the example that Neely set. Start tracking your cycle and paying attention to when your period comes, how you feel the week before, how you feel the week during, how you feel the week after. And that can give you some incredibly valuable information that can help you tailor your training to your own individual situation. So once you start to track this, and you can use an app, I know there are privacy concerns these days with that, so even if you don't want to use an app, you can just do it on a paper calendar or track it alongside your training and start to make notes about how you feel, what your symptoms are, and how that seems to influence how your training goes for that day and how you perform if you're doing a workout or a race. Then once you get that information, you can do some of the things that Neely did. You can take some steps to adjust your training. You can back off a little bit when you know you're not likely to feel great, and you can step it up a little bit when you know you're likely to feel better. You can also take some steps to mitigate symptoms that might interfere with how you feel on a given day. For example, in the book, we have a great protocol by Dr. Stacy Sims, who's done a ton of research in this area. She has a combination of supplements and over-the-counter medications that you can start to take before your PMS symptoms start in that can really mitigate those and decrease the impacts they have on how you feel. Lots of other steps and suggestions that we have in there too for ways to do this. And then finally, and I think really most importantly, it's really helpful to reframe your mindset around this issue. You can hear it in the way that Neely talked about this. It really would interfere with her confidence when she didn't understand what was going on. But once you start to track your ebbs and flows and know that you're going to feel a certain way at a certain time, it just helps you get more in touch and in tune with your body and feel like you understand what's happening and just increase your confidence in your performance again. And also know that while the research does show that there are some minor variations, most of those variations are in things like your perceived effort. They're not in hard outcome measures like your VO2 max or anything like that. So you really can perform well at any point in your cycle. It might just feel harder at some points than others. And knowing that and being able to work with that and just have that confidence, I think, is another critically important piece of this puzzle. So one thing that you might adjust as you get to know your cycle is your balance of hard work and recovery. And that's just a really important topic to address overall. So Neely is going to share a little bit about her experience with this.
Well, I always say that we're only as good as our recovery as athletes. And this is something that I kind of learned the hard way after a string of injuries, and realizing that what I was doing in training wasn't necessarily correlating to what I felt like I could do in a race. And then I had to take a step back and realize that I was running too hard too often. And it's one of my biggest regrets when I look back on many years of my running career, is that I never allowed for myself to have true recovery runs. So when I first moved to Colorado, I went for a run with Kara Goucher, and we did 11 miles at an 8:30 pace. And I usually ran 7-minute pace for every single run, except for workouts when I would run faster. And I asked her about it, and she explained she was recovering. She had a hard workout the day before, she was doing a hard long run the day after, and she needed recovery so that she could maximize her training. And it just clicked. I felt so good after finishing those 11 miles. I felt like I hadn't even run at all. And it's because I ran slower and I reduced the stress on my body and I allowed my body to recover at that easy aerobic pace. And I was able to break a injury cycle. I was able to feel stronger in my workouts, and all of a sudden, because I was running slower, I was racing faster. And I now see that with a lot of my athletes who come to me when they first join the team. I have to convince them that, hey, you can't run hard every day. It is not in your best interest to run your marathon goal pace on every single run. And if you can slow down, you can have all of the tools that you need on race day, because you'll have a very well developed aerobic system from those easy training runs. And then you will be able to maximize your performance in your hard workouts because you're not fatigued from your recovery runs in between. And once I get them on board, it's incredible to see the success that people can have. And so it's just kind of a shift of figuring out how can you maximize your recovery, because we're only as good as our recovery. So Cindy has a couple ideas from our book that she's going to share with you on ways that you can recover right.
Yes, and I do think it's so often the case that it's hard to buy into this idea at first, and sometimes it's not until you truly experience it firsthand that you become a believer. But I'll share a little bit of the science with you anyway. So when you are doing a hard workout or a long run or any type of challenging effort, you might think that you are increasing your fitness and strength right in that moment when you're doing the work. But what you're actually doing is applying a controlled amount of stress to your body. And then it's during the recovery, it's during the time after that hard work that you actually experience the physiological changes that come as a result of that hard work. So that's when you're gaining fitness and strength, and your cardiovascular system and your musculoskeletal system and all of these important systems and structures in your body are adapting to that hard work. So that means that getting that balance right of hard work and recovery is critically important to making progress in your running and reaching your breakthrough goals. So there are 6 different types of recovery that we go over in the book. And these are all in contrast to hard workouts, hard runs, long runs. So the first type of recovery is what Neely was just talking about, recovery runs. And as she mentioned, it's very important to keep them actually easy so you're not adding to that burden on your body. Active recovery is anything else besides running that's cardiovascular. So cycling, swimming, especially things that are lower impact or non-impact, those are great types of active recovery to keep your blood flowing through your body, but decrease the impact from running. Passive recovery is just kind of chilling out, watching Netflix, reading books, taking that downtime for yourself. Assisted recovery are tools like a foam roller, like you see here, or compression boots, any of the other technologies that can help you kind of jumpstart that recovery process a little bit. Sleep is one of the most critical components of recovery. So many of those adaptations that I was just talking about actually happen when we're sleeping. Growth hormones and all kinds of beneficial compounds are released while we sleep. And so the more strain you're putting on your body, the more stress you're under from training, the more sleep you'll want to get. And then what we call active downtime is actually scheduling breaks. If you're going through for a big goal, if you have a big race on your calendar where you're going to aiming to achieve that breakthrough, it's really important to build in time for yourself after that, a break in between cycles and seasons, so you can reset your mind and body and go for the next breakthrough. So when we talk about getting that balance right between the stress and the recovery, that there's actually an equation for this that Brad Stulberg and Steve Magnus talk about in a lot of their work. They're authors and coaches and experts in this area, and their whole project is called the growth equation. And that equation is stress plus rest equals growth. But again, it's critically important to get that balance right, so you're not overdoing it with the stress and not allowing enough recovery. That's when you get into overtraining and injury and burnout. So the exact particulars of that equation, those are going to vary at various points in your training cycle. As your training increases, your recovery is going to need to increase. It's also going to vary at different points in your menstrual cycle, and it's going to vary based on things like how much other stress you have in your life, because that's going to add to that burden of training as well. So when we talk about getting that balance correct between stress and recovery, there are a few different ways that you can track that and adjust it, and we talk about a few of them in the book. So one way you can keep tabs on this for yourself is by tracking your resting heart rate. And there are watches and apps that will do this for you, but we find it super easy to do it on your own in a little bit more of a low-tech way. So when you get up in the morning, first thing when you wake up, or maybe go pee and then come back and do this, put your fingers right here, look at your watch for 15 seconds and count your heartbeats that you'll feel under your fingers. Multiply that by 4, and that's your resting heart rate. And you really want that number to be relatively consistent, if not decreasing as your fitness increases. It's going to vary a little bit. This is something that you might notice changes a little bit at different points in your menstrual cycle. So that's normal, and you'll start to see those patterns too. But if you see an elevation that is significant or that increases steadily over time, that's a sign that you might either need to back off your training a little bit or increase your recovery, or possibly both. It could also signal something else. It could be that you are pregnant. Neely has noticed this. In fact, that's one of the ways I think that she detected her pregnancies even before she took a test. She can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Mm-hmm.
But you might be starting to get an infection. Maybe it's an early warning sign of COVID even, or something like that. And that's something else you want to pay attention to. So this simple measurement can be really powerful. Mood and motivation is another check. It's a little bit more subjective, of course, but if you start to track this over time, you're going to notice how this tracks with your recovery as well. So again, it's normal to have some days where you feel more excited and motivated about your training than at other times, and some days where you just feel happier and some days where you just feel more sad. But if you start to track this and you notice that there is a significant and steady downturn in how motivated you feel to train and in how your mood is, that's a sign that you are overtraining or under recovering as well. And then there's also the higher tech route is something called heart rate variability. And I won't explain the details of what that is, but just know that if you have heard of a Whoop strap, or there's another brand called iThlete and some other brands, I think, of technologies that track this for you too. It's another way to measure your recovery, and those devices assess your heart rate recovery, give you a recovery score, and let you know what you should do based on that, whether you are recovered enough to proceed with a hard workout that day, or whether you need to take a little bit more rest to get that balance right. So these are just all ways to keep tabs on this over time and make sure that you actually are making progress toward your breakthrough. And finally, we want to share what I think is a really unique chapter in our book as well about breathing. And Neely is going to share a little bit about her experience with this.
Yeah, so if there's one thing that I could say is the secret to success, I believe it to be a really well-developed ability to have a breathing rhythm during your runs. When I made the turn off the Queensboro Bridge at mile 16 of the New York City Marathon, I had been running alone for quite a while. And way up in the distance, I could see Sarah Hall running ahead of me on First Ave, and it's a very long straight stretch. And instead of being discouraged about all the miles ahead that I was going to be running solo, I decided to imagine myself running right there beside her, step for step. And I focused on my breathing, and I matched my stride to her rhythm. And I counted my strides and my breath, in 2 breaths, out 2 breaths, in 2 strides, out 2 strides. And I counted to 100, and then I started over, and I counted to 100, and I started over, and I did this mile after mile after mile to stay really focused and engaged. And slowly but surely, I started to reel her in. And several miles later, when we were in the Bronx, I passed her. And I truly believe that I was able to maximize my performance on that day, despite running by myself for most of the race. Because I had that breathing rhythm that helped me stay very focused, and I never lost concentration. I have utilized this in all of my races, and I think that it can be a benefit in bad weather. It can be a benefit when you're running by yourself. It can be a benefit when you're starting to get really fatigued, but you don't want to lose a step on whoever you're running with. it allows me to ride that line but not cross over. So that way I never bonk in a race. And so learning how to implement the breathing rhythm is something that I highly encourage my athletes to do, and it's something that I highly encourage you to learn as well, because I think that this can be a huge key to your success as a runner. And Cindy is going to give you a couple details on how you can practice this first in your own training and then in your racing.
Yeah, I loved working on this chapter with Neely. This is something that we had talked about in interviews before, even before we started collaborating on this book, and it's something that we had both come to on our own and found incredibly powerful. It's so often that I'm running by myself along the Chicago Lakefront Trail here, and I am counting out loud, and I'm certain that the people around me think that I'm bananas, but it really is so powerful and helps me stay on pace, stay focused, and there's so much that you can do with your breath, and we go into a lot of this in the chapter in the book. You can measure workouts, you can pace yourself, you can make sure that you're giving your best effort, even as Neely mentioned, if the conditions aren't perfect on that day. And it's just an incredible tool, in addition to just improving your calmness and focus and helping you execute during a hard workout and race as well. So there's a lot you can do with it, and a lot of different breathing patterns you might find work for you. But what I'm going to share with you today is just a way to get started with this if it's not something that you've ever thought about bringing your attention to on the run before. So to get started, it's really a great idea to just bring some attention to your belly and your breath when you're not running. And you can set this as one of those process and breakthrough goals. Maybe give yourself 5 or 10 minutes every day. Maybe again, it's just when you get up in the morning. It's really helpful to tie these things to something that you're already doing anyway, or a consistent time of day. But just take 5 or 10 minutes, lie down, one hand on your belly, one hand on your chest, and just breathe in for 2 counts. Breathe out for 2 counts. And just feel your belly and chest rise. And do that for 10 breaths. And do that every day until it starts to feel normal and comfortable for you. And once it does, maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 weeks, transition that into doing something similar while you're walking. So I like to do this when I walk down the street to I have an office mailbox down the street, and it's a few blocks away. So I'll do this then, or maybe you're walking your dog or taking a walk with your stroller. But just again, for 10 breaths, do the same thing. 2 counts in, 2 counts out, and time it to your footfalls as you're walking. So step 2, out 2, step 2, out 2. And again, after another week or 2, once that starts to feel comfortable while you're walking, it's time to speed it up and take that on a run. So pick an easy run and maybe go out and warm up for a mile or so first. And then just bring that attention to your breath in the same way while you're running. Time 2 counts to your inhale and 2 counts to your exhale as with each foot strike, and just do it again for 10 breaths. And then maybe start to extend that day by day to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a mile, 2 miles. And eventually you might find that you're doing this automatically on almost all of your runs. I know that I find that sometimes I do listen to a podcast or music when I run, but if I don't, I almost always find myself even subconsciously counting my breaths. And it's very meditative. I think it also just increases the mindfulness component of your run too, and it can help running be more of a powerful meditative tool for you, in addition to benefiting your performance in the long run. So this is just a little taste of what we have written about in Breakthrough Women's Running. And the whole book is set up almost kind of like this presentation was, where we have stories from Neely and other amazing athletes to exemplify the topics that we're talking about. And then we talk through some of the science and then give you some really solid advice for how to implement ideas that we talk about into your training to help you reach those breakthrough goals. So again, we have a chapter on goal setting. We already talked about that a little bit here today. We have a chapter on nutrition. We have expert input from Starla Garcia, who's an amazing dietitian and an Olympic trials qualifying marathoner herself. She shares both her personal story and her professional expertise. And they're also in that chapter 4 recipes from Neely herself that are all delicious. We have, and this is very important as well, a chapter on pregnancy and postpartum running. This is a very important part of Neely's story, and we know a very important part of reaching your goal as a woman who has big goals in running and in life. And this is another area where research is really starting to identify what is best for our bodies, and women have so much more information now than they did ever before, and we're excited to be a part of sharing that and advancing that conversation. We have a whole chapter on strength training, as I mentioned. We have one on injury prevention, which is critically important. And I want to say too that while that chapter gives a lot of advice on steering clear of injury, we know that isn't always possible. Running is a high impact sport and injury is going to happen. I'm actually injured right now. So that chapter also includes information on how to cope with injury and how to view it as not a setback necessarily, but as a critical component and just part of the athletic experience. And so often we find breakthroughs come after a setback, like an injury. We have a chapter on mental training, something else that's really important and often overlooked. And Neely just did a whole Instagram live with Human Kinetics that's live on their page right now on mental training. So go back and check that out because that's very important too and often overlooked. Again, we have a chapter on overcoming obstacles. Just as I mentioned, their injury and other obstacles are just a part of the process of going for big goals. And it's not about whether or not you're going to encounter an obstacle, it's about how you respond. And throughout the book, we have interviews with other top athletes too. We have 12 of them. And what all of those great women have in common is that they experienced obstacles en route to their goals, but they had breakthroughs anyway, and they share their stories of how they did that. We give some advice on that in the book too. And finally, we have training plans that Neely has written, everything from run, walk, return to run to 5K, 10K, half marathon, and marathon. So while you don't have to use those to get a benefit out of this book, they're there for you if you need them to reach that breakthrough.
Awesome. We are just so thrilled that we had the opportunity to talk with you today and to share a little bit more about the details of our book and some of the really exciting things that we are happy to bring to the women running community and to every runner because as you can see, a lot of these ideas are applicable for all runners, and no matter your gender or identification or where you're at in your running journey. So we just want to be able to be a resource for runners who are chasing their next breakthrough. We have signed copies that are available on my website, which is right there, getrunningcoaching.com. And there's a cool new bonus bookmark that comes with them that has a little spot where you can write down your big goals for what's ahead. So if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat so that we can answer your questions because we have about 15 minutes left and we would love to cover some more topics if there's anything that you're interested in learning about.
Hi, yeah, that was a great presentation. It's great to hear your personal stories, and I know you guys share many more of those in the book, as well as the other athletes that you mentioned, so that's wonderful. At the beginning, somebody asked, you mentioned including mantras during training. What are some mantras, or specific mantras that you've used during training or during racing?
Oh, I love mantras. This is so exciting. So this is something that I talked about quite a bit in the Instagram live that I did on mindset because we utilize the power of mantras in our mindset chapter. And I would say a couple that have stuck with me over the years. I utilize trust the process. That's a big one for me. And that's one that I have kind of adopted out to a lot of my athletes as well, that it is very important to trust the process, not rush things, not force things, let fitness naturally build, let that race naturally play out. and that can give you a little bit of a calm confidence. So that's a big one for me. Another one that I really like is yes, you can. And one thing that Cindy and I talk about in the book is utilizing you language, because the science shows that you, the brain registers you as someone else telling it to you, and you are more likely to believe someone else than yourself. So if you use I, it's not as powerful. So switching the letters around can make a big difference. And when you're creating a mantra, it's you can do it, you got this, you are strong. That can make a bigger impact.
Yeah. And for that reason, my go-to mantra is you do hard things. And I love that one for the reasons that Neely just mentioned, that idea that I'm talking to you to using that second person is just really helpful in that way. And I say, some people say you can do hard things, and that's a good one too. But I always gravitate toward you do hard things, because that is just an undeniable truth. When I am running and it's getting hard, I can remind myself, you do hard things. This is what you do. You're doing it now. You've done it before. You'll do it again. Rather than you can, it feels a little bit more like I'm cheering myself on, but I'm not quite totally sure. So, but I think what this illustrates too is that it's really important to experiment a little and figure out what works best for you. And you know, it's going to be different things are going to hit differently for different people, and also at different times. And one of the things that Neely talks about in the book is the way she sets different mantras for different training cycles, and even for different parts of the same race. And I think that just playing around with that in training and figuring out what works best for you at that time is a really important part of the process.
Great. This question's kind of along the same lines, but this person offered, I love this book. Well done, Neely and Cindy. Neely, can you talk about the importance of writing in a journal to identify positive mantras and how to reframe negative thoughts into positive ones? I love the emphasis on process goals.
Yes. So back in college is when I first started utilizing mantras, and it was because I was in a sports psychology class, and I have a coaching minor, and this was one of the required classes, and it ended up being one of my all-time favorite classes during my time as a collegiate. And I would write in a journal, and it was amazing because if I dedicated time, every week to writing in this journal, I wouldn't do it every day, but, consistently enough that I could kind of track trends. I was able to see when I would have like negative language kind of creep in. And instead of saying things like I can't, or I would be able to kind of go back in and say, today I was not able to execute, my goal for that workout. However, next time I would like to do this, and next time this is my plan. And so I was able to kind of shift and adjust those negative things that weren't really going to take me anywhere, and kind of change it into, okay, what did I learn and what can I move forward from? And so I found that to be really beneficial. And when I was doing that journaling, that's when I was able to kind of start figuring out what are some key mantras, because as I would write it out, I would kind of have like a trend of words that I would use that were consistent. And then I'd be like, oh, okay, that word, it really stands out. And so maybe it would be resilience, for example. And so that might be something that I'm like, okay, I've said that, a couple times over the last few weeks. And so I think that's a word that I need to gravitate towards and hold on to and create a mantra out of. And that's going to help get me through some harder times. So that might be a great tool and a great tip for someone to try. And we actually have some prompts in the Mindset chapter on exercising some of these, tactics to be able to write and journal to kind of learn more about who you are and what you need for your performance.
Yeah. And as a writer, I'll just add, it's really powerful. Even if journaling is something that you've never tried before, I really encourage everyone to give it a shot, because you might think that you know yourself pretty well or think that you understand your situation, but sometimes stuff comes out when a pen hits the page. I actually really encourage writing longhand too, because it's just different than typing. Sometimes things come out that you just didn't even realize you were thinking until you see them there on the page. And I will also add, Neely can attest to this, that journaling is also a really good preparation for later on writing a book, because we pulled out all of her old journals and training logs and she looked through them, and so many of the stories that we put in the book, she was able to enhance them by revisiting those memories through her journals. And we even share some actual excerpts from those journals in the book. So if you ever think you might want to write a book someday, journaling.
Totally.
Well, that's great. That you both have certainly written a great one. That is all the time we have today. We haven't gotten any more questions, so it's a good time to end this. I will pull the winner's name later this afternoon and get in touch with him or her. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially thank Neely and Cindy for such a great presentation. As Neely mentioned, if you don't already have a copy of their book, you can order an autographed one from her on her website. Tell your friends and fellow runners about it as well. You will, as I mentioned, get a follow-up email with a link to the recording so you can watch it over again and or share it with your friends. But thank you everyone for your participation today, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.